So these guys have been in a really interesting and amazing partnership that can definitely be scaled and taught lots and shared. So I'm just going to say thank you to Vicky actually, because the Manchester communication team have been phenomenal about leaning into temporary accommodation, about being brave about it, and they've always supported everything that we've asked them to do. So thank you so much. So yeah,
Thanks for all.
Come and share with us what you've been up to.
I'm just
Turn it
looking
round so you can
down
actually
this.
see.
That'd be great. Super. I'll put my glasses on. Okay, yeah, well thanks for inviting us to come and speak a little bit about what it is we've been doing. So as Laura said, Manchester Communication Academy, we're a secondary school in North Manchester, and it's in an area where we know there is quite high levels of deprivation. We know kind of local statistics, Manchester statistics, that we have a high number of children who are living in poverty. It's quite outdated to be fair, but not much kind of changes. But when you look at the overall map of Manchester where we are, we're right up here in Harper Hay, and the darker areas are the areas with the most deprived 10% in England. So you can see where our school is and all our catchment area surrounding is some of the most highest levels of deprivation in the country, really. So why that's important to us, obviously, we're coming at this with, it's not about having a deficit narrative, it's just about we have to understand the contextual profile in which we're working in and understand what is going on in the lives of our children and their families, because they are going to be barriers to them ultimately coming into school and accessing their education. And we want the school to be there to have its core aim is to mitigate the impact of disadvantage on that local community, and education is a way of facilitating that change in the long term. So we have to be very aware of that. So you can look at those statistics, but what does that actually mean for the lives of our children? And it's very, very complex and very different for every child. So we created this like a social mapping system almost, where we're looking at adverse childhood experiences or adverse childhood environments that they might live in. So some of those things, you've got like they might live in a property where there's domestic violence or substance misuse, or have a family involved in the criminal justice system. There might be young carers. We're also looking at anything to do with poverty. So not just the measures that the government are interested in, which is pupil premium with free school meals. Yes, our statistics are high on that, but actually there's a lot of in-work poverty and families who aren't eligible for free school meals, but we know they're still accessing some of our support services, because if you're somebody who's working 12 hours a week on minimum wage, in all likelihood you're earning a little bit over the 7,500 limit, which makes you entitled to free school meals at the moment. So, but that's still going to be very difficult with the cost of living the way it is today. So we have other services and other things that we have support in school, like a food hub and vouchers if families need it, and uniform provision and things like that. But then trauma is obviously a big thing as well. So we're also recording any traumas that young people have lived through. So we are thinking there are things like bereavement, but housing comes up massively. And so we've used this kind of social mapping system to kind of plot all the students, the ones that we know about. There will be families that haven't shared some of this information with us yet and we don't know, but everybody we know, we kind of got plotted on there. And so through that, we can see emerging issues. And so that was where housing started to come around. We were seeing that we have more and more families that were becoming known to us for having poor standard of private rent accommodation, or at risk of homelessness, or in temporary accommodation, or about to be made homeless. So we knew that was something that we needed to tackle. And we also worked collaboratively with a group of schools within our area, and we knew that wasn't just the case for us. So when we got together as a group of 15 schools, we could all at any one time name perhaps 5 or 6 families who were in crisis at that point. So we thought we kind of need to be a little bit more proactive around this. And this is a map that Shared Health actually shared with us back in 2019, I think. And all those little red dots on there are temporary properties. And the Golden Star is our school, so I don't know if you can see, but that's our school there, and that's really high concentration of temporary properties in the North Manchester area. At that point there was 598, and they're within that 1 square mile of our school. So we knew that that was an issue. That meant a lot of families were living in that kind of transient environment, temporary properties where they could be at risk of moving at any time. And also it meant that some of the families in those properties were families who'd been moved from other areas as well, who had lost their support network from where they were. So it was twofold really why we needed to kind of understand that a lot of the children that come to our school are from those properties, and look at ways we could look to support that. So a little bit of a timeline of events of how this kind of happened for us. So we started to identify around our autumn 2019 through some of those measures I've already mentioned, that homelessness and risk of homelessness was a real issue for us and something we really wanted to tackle. And come March 2020, we were starting to formulate a bit of a plan. We were thinking, we had some asks for the local authority, and we invited Andy Burnham to come and visit us at our school. We had a bit of an event and we talked to him, because at that point, as he mentioned himself earlier, the focus on homelessness was really around the single person homelessness and street homelessness. And we were saying this is what we would class as hidden homeless. People at that time weren't as aware that you had families who were homeless, who were in hotel accommodation, B&Bs, temporary properties. But unfortunately, March 2020, literally the week after Andy Burnham came to visit us, we went into lockdown and everything changed really. So we had those 2 years where there was almost a bit of a stay of execution for families who were at risk of homelessness, where there was an eviction ban, and so things kind of plateaued out for a while, and obviously as a school we had to focus our efforts on lots of other things as well at that same time. Then come spring 2022, when the eviction ban had been lifted, we knew this was about to explode again, so we knew this was something we really had to come back to. We couldn't kind of forget about it. So at that point, we'd started to kind of tackle some individual cases that we were finding when families were telling us about houses with vermin or with damp and mould, and their children becoming unwell, and showing us pictures of their kitchen, which was literally covered in black mould, and they're supposed to be able to cook food in these kitchens for their families, and we think this absolutely isn't appropriate. And we were trying to tackle these cases ourselves. There was just me and one other member of staff in school who were sort of ringing up landlords or trying to find our way through the system, and thinking, well, how on earth are families meant to navigate this system when we've got all those resources at our fingertips, and we can ring up to somebody and say, I'm an assistant principal at Manchester Communication Academy, and it comes with a little bit of kind of authority, and it shouldn't be like that at all, should it? But where do parents go? We could put our phone on and leave it on for an hour while we were trying to ring and get through to somebody, but most parents don't have enough data on their phone to be able to do that. So we thought we can't actually tackle this one by one, so we needed to pull in some support and look at what else was going on out there in the local area. What other partners could we pull together who also had the same aim as us? So that was when we started working with Shared Health and Shelter, Mustard Tree, which is a local organisation, very local to us, Citizens Advice, but also at that point we managed to get Manchester City Council team on board with us as well, which was absolutely brilliant. So we managed to sit round the table with representatives from all those different organisations, but also representatives from the Homelessness Solutions team, the private rent sector team, the compliance and enforcement team. We had all those people around the table, so we could start to explain what the issues were that we were seeing on the ground, what was really happening for our families, and what that really meant in terms of them missing their education, what that meant for a young person who'd been moved to a hotel that was in another borough and had GCSEs to sit, and it was very difficult to get in every day because they were moved to 5 different hotels while they were having to sit in their GCSEs, and examples like that. So we could bring those examples to the table and learn how we should actually be tackling that. And where we started with this was, for us, it was absolutely amazing because Shelter did some fantastic training for us on housing rights awareness. So that was for myself and colleagues from some of the other schools that are part of that cluster. So that meant, because we knew we needed to be proactive, we knew we needed to go out to our families and get them to tell us when they were at risk of becoming homeless or they were living in these poor standard accommodation. We didn't want to only find out when it was at crisis point and they had been moved into that hotel, or the ceiling had fallen in or something. We knew we needed to try and be more proactive around that. So we couldn't do that until we really understood the issues and understood how we could possibly respond to them. So the shelter we got from training enabled us to understand what a Section 21 means, how long that process is going to take, what the local authority's duty is within that period. And so it meant that we could then start to support these families. We knew then that we had a duty to refer. We could refer online ourselves if we knew a family was in that position. These were things that I think most schools might not have a clue about, and we certainly didn't. So to kind of upskill ourselves meant that we could triage those concerns. We could be proactive. We could say to our families, come and tell us if you've got a problem with these things, and let's see how we can support you to try and navigate through these systems. So it meant we could triage those concerns. We could either make direct referrals to some of the partners we were working with, or we could give out one of the template letters that was on the shelter website for somebody to send to their landlord, for example, and we could support them through those processes to try and move their situation along and get that. We knew we could pick up the phone then as well to those professionals that we were working with, we were sitting around the table with, and get their advice and their support on where we should be going, what we should be doing. And we also wanted to be able to provide some ameliorative support for those families. So if they were struggling to get in because they'd been placed into a hotel that was 8 miles away, we wanted to be able to provide the bus fare for them. So that's the sort of thing that we might do as a school. We can support them to apply to the local authority to try and get the free bus pass, but very often we're finding it comes back that they might not be eligible unless they're in year 11, year 10 or 11, things like that. So that for me, that's something big at the moment, which I think any family who's placed in temporary accommodation should be given access to free travel to get them to school and back. I think that should be like an immediate thing. We had one family that's got 4 children all at high school, and they didn't have the IGO passes, which mean you can get the half fare, so they were going to be charged full fare. So that first week she tried to get them into school. It was £80 a week just to try and get her 4 children to school. And that's just not doable, especially when you're going through trauma and a crisis yourself. When you're in that position, you've been moved from your home, you don't know where all your belongings are going to be stored, all these things are going on. So we want to provide that ameliorative support for families. Initially, we were offering school spaces as somewhere to cook, so we could use the school kitchen. We did have families coming in using the kitchens a couple at a time, sometimes building a bit of a peer support between them, whilst the children would maybe be doing their homework in the computer suite. We offered the use of, we've got some washing machines in school that we have in the cooking rooms as well, so they might use those while they're in hotels. But we've seen lots of improvement since we've been doing this and working with Manchester City Council. I think it all kind of came together at a really good time, where the council were also wanting to do things differently. There was a kind of change of leadership with a new director and assistant director of housing, who were looking at how can we do things differently, how can we make sure there's less families going into hotel accommodation, how can we try and identify much further upstream to try and prevent these families from coming into crisis. So there was that massive willingness to work with us as schools and recognise the roles that school can play in this early identification. The relationships that we already have with our families mean that we are trusted. We're a space where we can ask, and parents will tell us what's going on. They have that confidence in us that we will support, and we're not going anywhere because we're there every single day, aren't we? They're bringing the kids in. We're not going anywhere, and we're there to support. So this recognition that it can really go hand in hand, and we all need to work together to try and to come up with some solutions to this. And we also want to see that long-term strategic change as well. So we were really pleased to be invited to contribute, for example, to the consultation for the new homelessness prevention strategy for Manchester, which was launched earlier in the year, where this time there's much more of an emphasis on children and families, of that collaborative working, of the early intervention and prevention. So, really good things to see coming through. So just to give you an idea of the data, we're a secondary school, we're a large secondary school, we've got 1,200 children at our secondary school. So last academic year when we started this programme, we had 93 families who came forward to us to tell us that they had a serious problem with their housing. And when you look at that number, it's actually 204 children, so along with 124 adults. So it's a huge amount of people who were suffering, and they're still coming forward day after day. We're still getting more and more coming forward. By far the biggest was houses where there's serious disrepair, and those things do take a long time to tackle, and those are some of the ones that then fall into the next category of the Section 21. They end up, if they do complain, very often they end up having an eviction notice served. So it's really important that we try and tackle all of those issues together. You can see we had 23 where there was Section 21 eviction notices pending that we were able to support with, and 11 where there was serious overcrowding. Now, I'm not saying we've got any kind of magic wand, but we did start to see some improvements there. So there was, of those, 20 of those families by the end of the year were moved into new properties, and 35 had seen some improvement to their living conditions, and some of those were actually avoided to be made homeless in the first place. For example, where we'd been able to report it to the homelessness prevention team in good time, that they could actually do some work with the landlord to prevent evictions going forward, to maybe pay off some arrears or to do some negotiating and make sure that didn't come to that crisis situation. So for us, that's showing some green shoots of something really positive to take forward. And in terms of that strategic change, one of the things as well that we were asking for was for schools to be alerted when a family was placed into temporary homeless accommodation. Just like schools get notified if there's been an incident, the police has been called to the property the night before, there's been domestic violence, we get notified that the next day. We didn't know, and we considered that as just as serious a safeguarding incident if a child had been moved into a hotel that was 8 miles from school and they suddenly didn't have any of the belongings with them. For us, that is a safeguarding incident as well, and we need to know. So thanks to the work that Shared Health have been doing, this is starting to become a reality now, where schools are starting to be notified when this happens. For me, just mention free bus passes, but I've talked to everybody about that everywhere I go, and that's what I'm banging the drum on for. Free bus passes, I think, is the next way to go. It's those little wins where you think that's something that could actually be done quite simply, but if we look at, like somebody mentioned earlier, we don't have the data on a lot of this stuff, but if we were to see the data on the attendance levels for children in temporary accommodation, I think it would be very telling, and that's something that could be supported very simply by providing those free bus passes. Already mentioned about the contributing to the homelessness prevention strategy, and also being able to sit on the homelessness prevention board, which kind of is looking after the actions that sit behind the strategy. So kind of still being able to put the voices forward really of our families and their experiences there. And Lou is going to talk a little bit in a minute about a proposal to try and expand this model across Greater Manchester, because we think it's something that, you know, yes, it's putting a lot of pressure on schools, we do have to admit, but as schools, we're dealing with this anyway. We're having to deal with those families. We have no option but to try and support these families, so we might as well try and make this a coordinated response that has resources added to it and the support added to it to enable us to respond effectively to support our families. And then we asked our children, what does home mean to you? And this kind of sums up why we do it all, really. So just that sentence of being greeted by my mum and the scent of her cooking travelling through the house, that's what home means to a young person. That fits in wonderfully with what you were just talking about, Gifty, as well, doesn't it? You know, and they don't have that if they don't have those facilities, do they? And the last one, home means everything. Home means the world, and it does, doesn't it? We all should have that safe space that we can go home to and we can call home. So that's why we're doing it at the end of the day as a school, and we really appreciate the support from Shared Health and all the other partners that are working with us to be able to do that. So I'll hand over to Louis now, who's going to talk about the expansion of it.